So of the three films that we're doing this month, all have to do with someone who has written a book, but not necessarily writers. Joan Didion is the writer of the three, who has many books, many essays and magazines and things like that. So it's a little different than last week's. But still talking about writing, the writing process, how they use their life in the writing. She has written memoirs, as Michelle Obama's was a memoir last time. So there is that connects. Actually, all three of the films are people who have written about their lives. But Joan Didion has also written other things. She's written novels. She's written screenplays. She's written a play based on one of her books. So she's dabbled in a lot of different things. I mentioned in the notes, I first read her in college, her novel Play It As It Lays, which is like a real Hollywood story. And it got turned into a movie with Tony Perkins and Tuesday Weld. Not a great movie, but interesting if you like Hollywood stories kind of thing. But I really thought the two books of hers that I've read that I really liked were both of her memoirs. One is The Year of Magical Thinking, and then Blue Nights, which are not happy stories. They're about dealing with loss and grief. But I thought they were really well written and in an interesting way. So I guess everyone has seen the film. We're going to assume that everyone has seen the film, so we can talk about it that way. So I'm going to jump right to the questions because we ran a little over last time. We got so involved in them. So if you don't have the sheet, I'll just read the question part. So the first one that we thought was a good topic to talk about was, there's one sequence that surprised me when Joan Didion reacts to this montage of footage about sort of the dark side of the hippie movement of the 60s. She was up at Haight-Ashbury, which is often portrayed as, flowers and love and things like that. And she mentions that there was a scene that she saw a very young child who was on LSD. And she was a new mother at the time. They don't say that in the film, but that's true. And the director asks her how she felt when she saw the scene. And there's a long pause. And you might have guessed that she was going to say, I was horrified, I was shocked and everything. And she says, it was gold. I mean, this is like exactly what you want as a writer, to have a powerful scene like that you can put in. And it kind of points at this whole very detached view she had of all of her subjects. And I would say that's even in the memoirs, that even though she's writing about herself, she writes about it sort of as a journalist at a distance, which is a kind of interesting stance for her to take. So how did you react to that particular scene? And there will be other scenes too, but the scene about the little girl on acid, what did you think of that scene? You can just unmute yourself and sort of wave your hand. That's good. I saw Carolyn sort of waving her hand maybe. But you're muted, Carolyn. You're still muted. There you go.
I was appalled. The fact that she could have a child and look at a child that was out on acid or whatever and have that reaction, I thought either she's faking it or she, it just didn't seem even real to me.
I mean, he didn't press her. He didn't say, but as a parent, how did you feel? And like I said, I think her reaction was, as a writer, you look for things like that to happen. Somebody else, though.
Diane? Yeah, she was
Marilyn.
She's a writer, and actually through the whole movie, she's really deadpan. She doesn't show her emotions on the surface. And in fact, sometimes I think maybe she doesn't know what her emotions are. I think I can relate too. So I wasn't shocked, and she had to hold herself together. She couldn't fall apart. So I think she was trained from early on to just observe, very stoically, but, it came through in other ways, later, with the not eating and she handled it in a very interior way.
Okay, I see Diane and then Raymond, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, I was horrified when I first heard her say it was gold. And she went on, as not to reiterate what you said, but then I saw her as the ultimate journalist professional hat on. And yet further along in the film, when she and her husband hosts the party, the biggest one they ever had with Janis Joplin. And she discovers that someone had gone up into her daughter's bedroom, who was only, I think, 3 or 4, and she found drugs on the floor. She, you know, had the mother instinct kicked in, where she, you know, wanted everybody kind of out of the house. So yeah, she, you know, kind of had this split screen view of the world. Her professional view as a journalist, hitting a pot of gold with the image of a 5-year-old on crack or high or whatever. And then the mother, who finds that someone has essentially desecrated their house with drugs in her own daughter's room during a party. I thought that was interesting.
And Raymond?
Yes, hi there. I wanted to join Marilyn from before, and then my second point would be what Diane brought up, the professionalism. So firstly, I think I did know, because it was pretty chronological. I did know that Joan was a new mother at that time, but being a professional, she saw the story, or the potential for, or the angle, or the gold, as you know, as we all understand the worth. And then, you know, it's an ambivalence that a lot of people have around, you know, doing the right thing versus what's right around, you know, for the child. I mean, let's just say I've experienced acid, and, you know, it's way too heavy for most people. And I was horrified. So I was horrified and appalled when she first, you know, my reaction was projecting on what, because she pauses a lot. She's a writer who thinks about what to say. She was very deliberative, even though she was, you know, prepped. She was prepped for the interviews for the documentary film, but even still, she was very deliberative about her words. She paused. It was a pregnant pause. I expected me projecting onto her, you know, like my lack of being a father, my paternal or humanistic instincts, to be appalled. But then, you know, in another way, not surprisingly, she said, "Oh, this is material." So that's my opinion. And professionals, yeah. So Marilyn and Diane, thank you.
Way down here, Jennifer's screen, and then
Yeah, it's
Trisha.
What it reminds me of, the way she looks at it professionally as a journalist, reminds me of a war photographer. You're in the action, you see a scene, and you may be able to go and help and assist, but you're there as a photographer, so you're doing your business. And it sort of reminds me of that kind of scenario, the way she refers to it as gold. So that's sort of reminiscent to me of professional photographers in a war zone,
Yeah.
taking photographs.
That's a good comparison. I thought of a couple of documentary filmmakers that I've heard talk, actually at the Montclair Film Festival, who, you know, when you start a documentary, you're going to cover a person, or you're going to cover a group or something like that. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. And in one, something tragic happened, a shooting. And in the other one, something good happened. A football team that they were following won the championship unexpectedly. And in both cases, they said the same thing, which is, you can't plan these things, but boy, it's great when something like that happens, because it gives you a whole new power to the film. And there was a documentary I saw way back in college. I think it was put together by the JDL, and it was about a photographer for during World War II who took pictures of things at the death camps and things like that. And when you first watch it, you look at it and you say, like, how can this guy be standing there taking photographs of this stuff, like just coldly standing there and taking photographs? But the ultimate point of the film was that without those photographs, we wouldn't have had documentation of what happened. So it was necessary for those photographs to be taken. And there was nothing he could have done to stop anything, but you could have said, yeah, well, he could have just said, I'm not doing this, kind of thing. But so it's a different kind of point of view. I think if we could talk to Joan Didion a little bit more, and we said something about how that kind of bothered us, she might say, well, am I writing from the point of view of a mother of a young child, or am I writing from the point of view of a journalist? I'm writing from the point of view of a journalist. From the point of view of a journalist, this was a powerful scene that I could use. So I think Patricia. and then Marion.
You know, I'm not sure if I'm adding any more insight because I agree with everything that people have just been saying, but I thought that she seemed personally to be extremely fragile. At the beginning, she talks about how she'll have to learn to live with disorder. And, you know, in the interview with Tom Brokaw, she describes the seaside as it's always flat. She seemed to, you know, need that sense of calm. And she says she married a protector. And I think she is very sensitive and fragile and has it buried very, very deeply. You know, her daughter says to her at one point, you were okay, but you were remote. And, you know, she does do these very horrifying things in terms of writing about the LSD child, going down to Central America and immersing herself in a dangerous and frightening situation. So she's capable of things, but I think that truly she's a very delicate psyche.
I watched the film most recently with my wife, and she said, I don't get the sense that this woman's a like warm and fuzzy mom or wife. I just don't get that sense. And, you know, we don't really know. But, you know, I pointed out in the thing, if you didn't pick up on it just from watching the film, is that the director is Griffin Dunn, whose family, you know, it's her nephew. And they said she was more likely to open up to him than to anybody. She's done interviews before. The Brokaw one is actually a good one. I think it's on YouTube. But she's not a person who opens up a lot personally, although you say, well, she writes these memoirs. She tells you everything about her life in the memoirs. Right. That's where it appears, not here, not in a conversation and things like that. So I guess it would not be expected that she was going to break down and cry about the LSD baby or anything. I think Marion also had a hand up.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually had seen this documentary before because I'm a big Joan Didion fan, and I think that's a very famous part of it. But the thing is, and journalists are my heroes, but you have to be, you know, stand back. And also, you just made the point that she was responding to a question from her nephew. So who asked her, what did you think when you saw that? And it turned out to have been gold. So, I mean, like if you could have gotten a reading of her head right then, who knows what would have been inside her head. But I mean, it was gold for her.
I mean, if she'd been more conscious about image, if that really mattered a lot to her, she could have said, well, I was horrified, I was shocked,
Right.
I wanted to throw up. But as a journalist, I felt, but she doesn't do that. You know, she's pretty straightforward and pretty short in her answers too. There's not a lot of long, detailed answers. So,
Right.
is there someone else on this one? Because there's a second question that goes along with this. Raymond?
Yes,
see
thank you.
Raymond.
Just a couple of things. I think of the word dispassionate. So she was not unemotional, but she could be dispassionate. And then I think somebody said the photographer in the war, the young man, and then that's like the nature photography too, when they're capturing the lion, you know, getting the little wildebeest or whatever. And, you know, you can't interact. You can't stop nature from doing its thing. And thirdly, I think we were set up for that when she first talked about her father as being, you know, like I think her daughter echoed it somewhat when the daughter said remote, I think, but Joan about her father said that she thought the norm, the familial norm was that the father, whatever it was, didn't interact, didn't show his feelings, wasn't warm and fuzzy on his own right. So she was set up for that, you know, however sad that is, you know, I might project however sad that is for her life, however effective that was in her art.
Yeah, I get the sense her father, who was in the Army Air Corps, they moved around a lot, base to base kind of thing. He also suffered from a lot of depression, apparently. So, you know, this may have been a model that she saw at home, the lack of contact and things. Not much of anything said about her mother, really, that would lead me to it. But the second part of that particular question was about another scene, which is when she's also writing, again, about like the hippie thing gone bad. She has an essay called The White Album, which you can find online. And she said that many people I know in Los Angeles believe the 60s ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969, the day of the Manson murders. And I wonder how people responded to the sequence that comes after that, about how she really befriended to write about one of the Manson followers, Linda Kasabian, which I also found shocking in a way, that whole sequence. Anybody have a reaction to that part? Joyce?
So what I thought about in that part was the novel based on In Cold Blood, Truman Capote. And Truman Capote got very attached to the little one. I forget his name. Which one is Perry? I think.
Perry, I think, yeah.
Perry, I think. And it's so funny because I happened to have watched In Cold Blood again this weekend because I hadn't seen it in a long time. But he became so close with Perry, who was obviously involved in this murder, and they knew it. There, I guess, even going back and reflecting on this last question, was the photography analogy I thought was great, because would the photographer necessarily turn away from the quote unquote scoop? Maybe unless they were going to get really physically ill, they wouldn't turn away from it. So I guess in her own, I don't know if it's to say support, but I can't think of another word, but in support of Joan, she saw with the young 5-year-old, she saw a story which in some ways could be culturally beneficial to mankind too, to expose what was happening. And the same thing, having been totally addicted to the whole Manson thing, I could see her becoming close with Linda Kasabian, because there's no way to really get inside a person's head from reading the newsprint. But maybe her own, because she was so brave, she went to El Salvador and all these places. Maybe that was the way she felt emotionally, that she could connect with her and figure out, like, why did she become involved with this nutcase, you know? That was, by the way, I watched this movie twice because that helps me. But I also saw it a couple of years ago when it came out. It's really good. And I also read the book, so. Anyway, that's my take on Linda Kasabian.
Okay. Anything else on the Manson sequence?
I think as a writer, she was kind of like a photographer looking through a camera lens. Sometimes when I take pictures, I'm so focused on taking the pictures that I'm not seeing what I'm taking pictures of fully. It's not really, I'm not absorbing it. So her as a writer, she may be observing differently than we do, regular people. And, that's just my thought.
I mean, I can understand a writer spending time with a subject that they're writing about, but I mean, she goes a little beyond, because she talks about having her over to the house, making food for her and the baby and things like that. And it's like, I don't know, that's a little beyond the normal journalism thing, which brings me to the point on the sheet that's in the introduction. She was considered part of what they call the new journalism. Tom Wolfe is like the other big new journalism person. And the whole idea was that you would write nonfiction, but it would read more like fiction, so that there would be a little narration, there would be dialogue written like dialogue would be in a novel and stuff. And that became the appeal of it. And also sometimes characters, the author appeared as kind of a character in it. There's a famous Esquire essay, not by her, that's called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. And it's about a guy who goes out to interview Frank Sinatra, and he never meets Sinatra, because Sinatra's sick and he doesn't want to meet with somebody, and he meets these other people. And the whole article, and it's a long article, he never meets Sinatra. You say, like, well, then there's no story. No, there's a whole story about his attempts to meet with Sinatra, his friends commenting on it. And people said, like, well, that's not journalism, is it? It's not even objective in some ways. And he said, no, this is like a new kind of journalism. So even when she writes memoir, I think the journalist is still there. It never really leaves. Anything else on those two scenes?
I just want to ask a quick question, Ken.
Yeah.
Where I didn't spot the part in the film where it talked about that she was diagnosed with MS. You mentioned that
It's not.
Oh, okay. So I was going, I didn't see that. I didn't see that.
There's some things they avoid. I'm going to talk about that with the Griffin Dunn. In fact, we should mention now, as a kind of over thing, that it is a film done by her nephew. So you could say, well, how objective is it? He's not going to, slash and burn his aunt and anything. It's a very kind thing. And he does definitely avoid, we'll talk about it on the fourth question, but he definitely avoids some of the things that could have been controversial and negative about her life or the way she treated subjects or whatever kind of thing. So there's a little imbalance in the way it's put together and things. Okay, second question is really at the heart of the Joan Didion story, which is there were two tragedies that hit her in less than 2 years. In 2003, when their daughter, Quintana, who they called Q, was in a coma with septic shock from pneumonia, her husband, unexpectedly, John Dunn, suffered a fatal heart attack while sitting at their dinner table. So Didion puts off his funeral arrangements for about 3 months because she wanted Quintana to be well enough to attend the service. And she writes about all of this in The Year of Magical Thinking. The film doesn't really go into depth about it, but there's at least one passage where we hear an example of that magical thinking. Did you catch the moment where magical thinking comes up?
Yeah.
How about, I see a couple hands, but is there anybody who hasn't said anything who wants to get something in? Let's get some new voices here. I don't see everybody on the screen either, so otherwise I got to go back and try. Stan's got a hand up. Stan, unmute. You're muted, Stan. There we go.
She says something to the effect that she's waiting until he comes back, that he'll return soon. And she was almost like a little child who had this magical thinking that her not only her father, but the protector, the guy who kept her going, would return. And so I thought that was a key factor in what was going on. It's almost like she waited 3 months to have her daughter attend the funeral. So it's almost like where was what she wanted to hold on to him. That having her daughter attend the funeral, to me, that wasn't really the issue for her. Is how long can I hold on to this man who I was with for such a long time?
Yeah, the scene is when she's at the closet with all his clothes, and the comment is, are you going to get rid of all the clothes, or why don't you get rid of all the clothes? And because he might come back. What if he comes back? And you can say, like, well, that's completely ridiculous. He's not coming back. But that's her whole thing in the Year of Magical Thinking, how she just wasn't really able to, for a long time, address what was going on. The term magical thinking just popped up the other day on the news, which kind of surprised me. And not to get deeply into politics, but it said that, when you hear President Trump say something like, I won by a lot of votes, he said, it's basically magical thinking kind of thing. This idea that if you say it and you think it, it might possibly come true. And it's always connected with things that are hard to accept, like a death or something like that. The other thing there is the idea of magical thinking seems quite unlike the reporter, I think, Joan Didion. I mean, when she came out with that book, I thought, Joan Didion, like the super realist, tough lady kind of thing. So how do you rationalize the way she reacted to her husband's death with that very different persona that she had as a writer? Does anybody have a way to justify those or rationalize those two things? I mean, we're just guessing because it's not in the film. I have a guess myself, but that's Sandy?
Yeah, I just think she changed dramatically when she lost her daughter. And, I think that she's a very different person now in her aged state than she was when she was the tough writer. And she said that, he was always there. They were editing each other's work.
Right.
So they were sort of a team. So when she lost the two of them, like the rug was pulled out from under her. I think she's a very different person now in the interview than she was then. That was my impression.
Can I be heard? Hello.
Yes. Roz.
Oh, good. I wasn't sure what to do. Well, I'm at sea because of the mishaps about my iPhone and connecting. So I never knew what this subject today would be about. I thought it was about magical thinking, possibly because that's the only thing of hers I've ever read. And I also saw the play. And just to comment on that, since it's the only one I'm familiar with, it was her way of dealing with it and denying it and living with the reality for a while because of her deep love and her deep attachment to her husband, as well as the tragedy of her daughter. So that was her way of dealing with it. And it was an extremely effective play. I saw it on Broadway as well as the book. So I'm sorry that I can't comment further because I missed out on so much of the preludes and descriptions of the books that you were going to discuss today.
Well, we're really on the film, not the books, but you can't avoid the books when you're talking about Joan Didion, and even if it's a film about her. Raymond, I saw a hand.
Yes, thank you. So it's not my heritage, and I don't know Joan's heritage, but I think in John Donne's forebears world, the Irish wake would have put the body on display. I mean, I think the term wake, in the funeral is about in case the otherwise presumed deceased wakes up. So I don't know if it's that around, like from her husband's heritage. If she didn't pronounce him dead. I mean, of course, in part for Quintana's consciousness to come back, but that was a 3-month wake, so to speak. I mean, even if they had buried, I don't know. I don't know if they buried the body and then just not had a memorial funeral thing, but I think the Irish wake sort of is metaphorical around that for me.
Okay. I mean, my own guess, and I was only a psych minor, so I don't know, but her life was pretty golden, I think, up until the time that her husband died. I don't think there was a lot of heartbreak in her life professionally and personally. And I think those two things hitting her pretty close together, I think was just more than she could really handle. I think she had been pretty blessed before that. But, we're guessing. Anyone else on the tragedies in her life? I would say that those two books are, I think, her two best books, the two memoirs. Diane?
Yes. And in response to the fact that this led her to write the Year of Magical Thinking, and she says in the movie, the reason was I had to write it down because no one ever really told me what it was like. In other words, grief. And I thought that was a very telling comment. And it made me think about way back when I was in hard labor with my daughter, and I was, in the hospital, and I was thinking, nobody told me it was going to be like this. I mean, I read every book and what have you. So it was her process to understand herself and the situations around her, which led to her writing. And it was cathartic, I think, for her to be able to do that. That's all.
Okay. The Jennifer screen.
Yes, I was wondering why she said she was feeling guilty about her daughter dying and she felt she didn't protect her enough. But I think her daughter was 39 and married and kind of out of her life already. But why did she feel so guilty about the death?
Well, again, it's part of the unspoken parts of the film, but her daughter had a lot of problems with alcohol. And I think at some point they were a little bit estranged, but she also seems to feel guilty because she waited those 3 months and then had Q come out to California. And it was at the airport that Q fell, hit her head. And it's one of those things like, if I hadn't told her to come to California, it's like you have that car accident. You said, why did I drive down that street? I never drive down that street. If I had just stopped at the red light instead of going through the yellow or something like that. And that's a kind of magical thinking too. The idea that if you could have just changed something everything would be better. So I think that's part of that too.
So at that young age, someone falling and having that terrible, death happen, doesn't that normally happen to older people, kind of?
Well, it was a brain injury, and she didn't go to the hospital apparently right away. And she was in and out, and I think it took a year before she actually died. It was a year later. So, but again, it's one of those things that's it's sort of glossed over. It's not really Joan's story; it's someone else's, so he doesn't deal with it. But there's a lot more to Joan Didion's story than, of course, we get in the documentary. I think Patricia might have a hand up there. Yep. Unmute.
I'm sorry.
Okay, you're good.
There's a scene where she's walking in the gloomy atmosphere of a church, and she says she feels guilty. Isn't there a part earlier where she said, I started to deal with losing my daughter? And now this was very premature. Her daughter was still definitely her daughter at home. But I felt she was maybe emotionally withdrawing a bit. Dad made her breakfast and took her to school. And, maybe she was feeling badly. She was promoting her book in New York when the daughter died of pancreatitis.
Right.
I mean, she might have had a lot to feel bad about.
Well, that leads us perfect lead into the third question, which talks about the fact that, coming to LA for her father's funeral is when Q falls. 6 hours of brain surgery, some recovery, acute pancreatitis. And when Joan is away in New York promoting Year of Magical Thinking, the book about her husband dying, not about her daughter dying, her daughter dies and she's not there for her, kind of thing. So then another layer of guilt comes, and that leads to her second book about dealing with all these things, Blue Nights. The second death didn't, I said, elicit another year of magical thinking, though. She seems to have learned certain things from that first death and writing that book. And I think she mentions in the film, maybe I read it somewhere, though, that she talks about she needs to work out her ideas on paper. When she writes about them, that's when she truly understands even herself. So it talks about, in that book, it deals with Q's death, and it leads her to re-examine not only her daughter's life, but also her own role as a mother. How does she seem to judge herself as a mother? I mean, we don't have a lot of evidence in the film, but from what you've seen, how do you think she judges herself or rates herself as a mother? I'm going to go to the Bernard Square first, and then Joyce.
I would say there was no room for Q in the dynamic of Joan and her husband. I think they were really, really tight. And I would think you have to find some space for her. And I wondered where that space was. And I also wondered how a mother leaves her daughter, who is in dire situation, in the hospital and goes on a book tour, which could be postponed. So those are the two things that I sort of took away from the film negatively, that I don't know that she made a lot of room for Q, and that she wasn't very motherly in terms of worrying about her health. Also, I had a question. Was she married, Q, at the time? Was the husband there?
As far as I know she was married. I believe the husband was there.
I saw that. I didn't think they mentioned that either. They showed the wedding and they never mentioned him again after that. So it didn't seem like they didn't know if she was still married or divorced or separated or whatever.
No one has commented that Q was adopted, and I think that has some relevance here.
Well, actually, I was just going to say that the line that my wife said really hit her. She said, you should have put this into your notes, was she said, when Joan says about Q, that she said, what part of the guilt was, we chose her. We chose her. We're the ones who picked her, and took her in. So it's kind of like everything that happens is our fault because we took her in and made the life for her. So if her life wasn't good, it's us. I mean, we chose this person and everything, which, I don't know that you can really blame that. And like I said, we're not going to psychoanalyze her, but there certainly seemed to be some guilt on her part about maybe being an inadequate mother. Stan, and then, well, Joyce.
She also said that.
Can you just comment on the name of the documentary, since I missed out on so much? I was not able to see the film. Can you tell me what?
It's on Netflix and it's called Joan Didion, The Center Will Not Hold.
I don't have Netflix. Is it possible to see it elsewhere?
Not that I know of, but.
Yeah, there's a link on YouTube, but we're a little suspect of it.
Yeah.
What's it called again? I'll look for it, at least some trailers.
Joan Didion, The Center Will Not Hold.
Okay, thank you.
Joyce and then Stan.
I was just going to say that she said somewhere right at the time that Q died, that as parents, we were put here to protect our children, and I failed to protect her. And that was one of the things that she felt the most guilty about. That was what I got at the end.
Yeah, which isn't understandable as a parent. It's an understandable thing, even if it's a situation where you say, there's nothing you could have done. It doesn't matter. I still feel like that was my job. Stan?
Well, I thought that it was difficult for her to relate to her daughter while her daughter was alive, but she wrote that, what's the book called? Blue Nights or something like that?
Blue Nights.
And I thought she said specifically, now I can finally relate to my daughter by writing about her, and this was her way. So, her emotions and her writing go hand in hand. What I found interesting about her was during the interview, maybe she wasn't animated in her books or in her photographs of her, but because of the MS, I would think, and she would wave her hands while she was talking, and you could see it was almost as if her hands and her body were trying to tell you something about all the emotions that she had, I won't say suffered, but certainly towards the end of her life, it was kind of tragic. So she's a lot more complicated than just saying she's dispassionate or impassive. There's so much I just found in those animated interviews that there was a lot going on within her.
Yeah, I wrote on that question that in what she called the blue nights, which she defined as evening hours before the summer solstice, that she feels are, quote, the opposite of the dying of the brightness, but also its warning. This whole idea that, there's this light, blue light, but it's not dark, but it tells you that the darkness is coming, and that she kind of felt this in her life. And in that book she talks about, but not in the film, about she really has a hard time accepting the fact that she's aging. She was diagnosed with vertigo and with MS, and that never comes up in the film at all, although, like you said, there may be evidence the way she moves her hands and things. But she talks about how she really resists getting old and eventually dying. She wants to fight it. I don't know. I ask, is there evidence in the film, if any, of that resistance? Do you see any resistance on her part to growing old or giving in to things? Marrying.
When she seems to deny that she's getting frail. I mean, when her nephew, I think it is, says to her, you're so skinny, so thin, we've got to hook you up. She said, oh no, I weigh the same now as I've always weighed. Which can't possibly have been true.
No. In fact, there's the whole thing about when she comes to New York to do the show, the Broadway show, that part of the aim of the producer, friend, agent, editor, is to get some food in her. Make sure she starts eating meals because she's just wasting away. Like get her back into the world, get her back eating and talking to people and doing things. So, but yeah, the fact that she says I'm the same way they always was, that is absolutely cannot be true. I mean, you saw pictures of her when she was younger and stuff, and she was very, very conscious of the fact that she became a sort of fashionista, known for her sunglasses and her dress and that kind of thing. And she loved that. I mean, she starts her career at Vogue right out of college. She doesn't write about fashion, but she's in that world all the time. So I think there is this whole resistance. I'm actually a little surprised that she allowed herself to be filmed for a documentary and stuff, because I'm sure she didn't like the way she looked in those years. I think she's 83 when they made the film, or 82, still alive. But she doesn't like to make appearances. So I think there's that kind of resistance also to it.
When did she die? What
She
year?
didn't die. Still alive.
I didn't think so, but you keep
She's
talking
85.
about it as though she was gone.
No, she's 85, but she doesn't make appearances or do interviews or anything anymore.
And does she live in LA? Where is she? LA or New York?
New York. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Griffin. One other thing, and someone mentioned, I guess Roz mentioned that she saw the play. You see Vanessa Redgrave in the film. Vanessa Redgrave played her in they call it a play, but really it's a one woman show is really what it is. She plays Joan in the Year of Magical Thinking on Broadway. And then they became close friends. And again, it doesn't mention this stuff unless you dig deeper beyond the film, but Vanessa Redgrave and her had a connection too. I don't know if you remember in the news, Vanessa Redgrave's daughter, Natasha Richardson, she was an actress.
Yeah.
She died after hitting her head in a skiing accident.
Mhm.
And it's close to what happened to Q kind of thing. And I think they really worked with each other, identified with each other, exchanged ideas, became lifelong friends after that. The fact that Vanessa plays her talking about those things on stage, some of it probably is also Vanessa talking. So, I mean, that's another one of the things beyond the film, which personally, I thought it would have been interesting if it was in the film, but they do avoid it. So my fourth question is really about Griffin Dunn, who is also an actor, and he's directed some things too. I know him, I remember him best as a dead guy in American Werewolf in London. He's the guy who gets killed by the werewolf and keeps coming back to tell the other character, you're a werewolf, you got to die. He's very funny. He's falling apart and he's picking at his skin and things like that. He's also in After Hours, Martin Scorsese's film. And he plays on This Is Us, if you watch This Is Us. He's Nicky, the lead character's brother, who got messed up in Vietnam and became an alcoholic and things like that. He's done a couple films as a director, but this is his first and only documentary that I could find. He did Practical Magic, which is a fantasy film with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman. And we want to talk a little bit about how we would rate him as a director. But I'm also going to mention, that's not on the sheet and not in the film, the producer of this film is his cousin, Annabelle Dunn. So this is a real family project here. So I have a feeling the film was put together. Let's make sure we get, while Aunt Joan is still alive, let's document her life in the way that she would want her life documented. And they do avoid a lot of things about the family. It's slightly hinted at, I think, that John Dunn was possibly a little bit abusive, if not mentally, physically. That's kind of avoided. They talk about him being tough and things like that. That Q was an alcoholic is not really brought up. Her one friend says that she was drinking too much, but that's about it. They don't talk about the fact that Joan's father, like I said, was a very depressed person, and that they moved around a lot. They didn't have a very stable home life and everything. I think the Tom Brokaw interview is the one where she says, we chose Q, and that she felt guilty about the whole LA trip. So there's a lot of things that are not mentioned that I don't know. I think they play into the story. And it's sort of like when you read a novel and you don't understand some things, but then if you read about it, you say, oh, because in his life he did it, but it's not on the page. You know, it needs to be on the page. So I felt like some things needed to be on the screen, but it was kind of a sanitized version of Joan's life. So we'll look at him as a filmmaker and see if we can rate him on some of the filmmaking aspects. We talked about these last time too. So what about just as a film? What did you think of the way he mixed and edited the stock footage, the archival footage, the interview footage? Did you find that was an effective way to put together the film? Ray?
Yes, I did, period. What I didn't like was how it sometimes was confusing to me. When I heard Joan's voice speaking, I had to discern whether that was her reading from her written work and her speaking to as an interviewee to the camera, to the director. But I like the film. I like the direction of it. I like the flow. I like the chronology. It was linear. I liked, it had a good beat. I could dance to it.
I
Oh
really.
no, wait, I'm sorry. No, it's another thing.
I'm old school. I like a linear story, even in a novel. I don't like a lot of flash forward, flashback, teasing kind of stuff. I like a linear story, and this is very linear story.
Yeah. Have I got an Orson Welles documentary for you?
Well, it could be the ones we watched last time.
I know, I'm kidding. Yes, get it, but But again, I like the mixing of archive, personal, and new film. But I found it off-putting for me to have to know, like, from the style of her reading versus the style of her talking to the camera as an answer to a question.
I like that they had her read passages as narration because, one, it was polished. I think I could tell when it was Joan reading because most of the time it was smoother than her ad lib answers. And also he did cut away once in a while, and then you saw she was holding a book in front of her or something like that, so that there was a kind of clue to it. But I like that kind of narration that went through it. And I did like the way he mixed in even some like stock footage of like the 60s, the hippies, Janis Joplin, that kind of thing. So it gave you a sense of where we're moving through the years kind of thing. So I thought that was good. Anything else on that first part there, Pat?
Ken, I had the impression that some of her reading was a much more youthful voice, and they could have been recordings from a book tour or some other reason that she would be reading aloud. It was very different from her interview.
I didn't pick up on that, so I can't respond to that. But I know, to me, it just sounded polished, more polished, some of the things. And I thought, well, she's reading it off a page. She's not talking off the top of her head. Maybe I sound more polished when I read off my sheet than when I'm
in my defense, I did figure it out. I'm not that slow, but there were times when, yes, if she was reading, it was less paused and stilted and pregnant pauses than when she was thinking of what to say on the fly for the camera. Yeah, I got it, but sometimes it was first it was like, okay, I have to switch gears now. Which way are we going here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was thinking about something, and the whole idea that she would sit for this interview with a nephew was pretty brave on her part because of, she wasn't well, she was much older, and she was a fashionista back in the day. She was glamorous, she used to hang out with all these famous people, and to be seen in that light, I thought it was pretty brave on her part.
Okay. Now, on the second item there, B, maintaining objectivity, we're talking about Griffin Dunn as an interviewer with Joan and the others, and also being the director. There's a danger when the director becomes the interviewer and when the interviewer and the director is a relative of the person. Did you feel he was objective, or did he kind of throw her softballs and things like that as an interviewer on there? I mean, we actually see him. We literally see him a couple of times talking. Do you think he was objective? I see Bernard, I think, and then Stan.
I felt that the film itself was kind of an intimate experience of being with her. I almost felt like we were in a living room, and she being the most important person in the room, we all sat around and listened to her reminisce about her life. And every once in a while, somebody in the room would ask a question. Well, what about this or what about that? And so she would go off on a tangent talking about this or that. Rather than a linear, she started here and she ended there, the film was about her. And I felt that I knew much more about her at the end of the film than I did at the beginning. And a lot of the new things that I knew about her were intimate. And I felt like she had sat with me and with my friends and just narrated how her life had been.
Mm.
I think, Patricia, you just lit up. I don't know if you're trying to talk or,
Oh, I didn't mean to.
okay.
I wondered if the interview served or the documentary served her at all.
In what way?
I can
Like
see
if it's
her nephew thinking she's well known and capture her before she's gone, but I think she doing it was an act of love for the family. I think she was very fond of all of them. You know, she went to Connecticut to meet them and fell in love with the family. So I decided to marry John. You know, her sister-in-law goes and finds their house for them on the Pacific coastline. She was very attached to them, I think. But I don't know that the interview would have been something she wished to do.
Well, I think it was motivated by the nephew. I think Griffin or maybe the family said, we really should do something for Aunt Joan and document this for her, kind of thing. So she agreed. I don't think she would have agreed if some other filmmaker had come up with the idea. She would have probably said, I don't need to do that. You know, not necessary. Don't want to participate.
I don't think it was objective at all. I think it was, you know, kind of a biography, but in a, you know, in a very sensitive, loving, caring way. And I didn't mind that it wasn't objective, that it was very subjective. And he was going from the beginning of her life. Basically, we went from the beginning of her life, and she really wanted to die at one point when she went anorexic like that. And there was the glamorous, and then you go to the ending where you had, not that you felt sorry for her, but you felt the tragedy that she's experienced. And I actually, it really touched me how I really felt very close to her, and I felt a lot of empathy for her. And, you know, it was very emotional watching the movie. And I think the most emotional part of the movie was kind of the way it ended, more towards the end. It was when she was awarded, she got an award from President Obama. And for two reasons. First of all, I saw President Obama and I said, yeah. And the second one was, here's this lady, what a tribute to a woman who's gone through so much. And so I didn't think it was, I don't think objectivity was to be expected in this direction.
Yeah, no, I think so too. The fact that, you know, they don't hide the fact that it's her nephew making the film. So, you know, there's a certain lack of objectivity in that part. A couple of things about the family and that people putting together and things avoid it. By the way, a companion film, if you wanted to have a film that's sort of similar to this, I think might even be a little bit better film. If you know Nora Ephron, another writer who in some ways is like Joan Didion in some ways. There's a film about her called Everything is Copy. Everything is Copy, which was also made by one of Nora Ephron's family members, interestingly. But it was something they apparently both agreed on, that everything out there, little girl on LSD, the death of my husband, everything is fodder to be used for your writing. Everything's copy. And I think that's actually an interesting idea of hers. But I mean, there's a lot of tragedy in that family. Griffin's sister is also somebody you might have read about in the news back in the 80s. Dominique, she was best known, she was in the film Poltergeist. But she was murdered by her boyfriend in the early 80s. And, that was another tragedy in the family kind of thing, which, doesn't come up. Her father started investigating the murder. Dominic, his name is Dominic Dunn, and he became like a true crime writer. He produced, films earlier than that. He produced Needle Park, which was Panic in Needle Park, which was a film that Joan worked on with her husband, Boys in the Band. But he became this like court TV guy and wrote novels based on true crime and everything, kind of started the whole true crime genre. So, I mean, that happened. And the people in the film who I thought were interesting, her editor, collaborator, David Hare, I thought he was one of the better interviews that they did. Like I said, they didn't have anybody who had really a bad take on her. The one friend of Q who mentions that, she was drinking a lot and I was worried about her. That's about as hard hitting as it gets as far as saying something bad about the family. And what else about the family? I mean, there were some interviews I didn't know if they really should be in there. Harrison Ford, that little bit with Harrison Ford, was that just to get a name in there? Harrison Ford. I mean, my wife was excited Harrison Ford was on the screen, but really, he was a carpenter. He was a carpenter for George Lucas. I mean, okay. The only good point of that was that he said he was definitely lower class, but he was never treated that way when he came to the house. They treated him like everybody else. So I guess that was a positive thing, because she had a pretty posh life. Like I said, she had a pretty golden life until those deaths occurred. And then she kind of went down a little bit. But, and then the last thing here, what aspect of the documentary did you find strongest? And if you needed to shorten the film, what would you have eliminated? Like, so what's the weak and what's the strong? So give us a weak or a strong part of the film. What really hit you the most? If you had to pull out a clip and say, let's just watch a clip of this film and talk about it, what would you pull out? Hard question. See, if you previewed the questions, you could have been prepared with your answers. You could have had your notes ready.
Marion, I
Just
actually
like
had
Joan, you
notes.
could have had your passage and you could have read it and been smooth. So,
I actually had notes.
all right, somebody's talking. Who's talking?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, I love what struck me when I was looking at those questions was at the end of it, I became aware of the music. I thought that whoever chose the music did a really good job. It just set a perfect mood, I thought. I mean, I didn't even, it wasn't intrusive, and lots of times I find music intrusive, a score.
Music was brought up last week in our film, and I guarantee there are people who, when you just made that comment, said there was music. I don't remember there being any music. I mean, music is one of those things that is often overlooked, and some filmmakers say it's like editing. If you notice the editing, that's not good. The best editing is you say, I didn't even notice it was edited. I didn't even notice there was music. It just somehow the music worked for me, kind of thing.
Yeah, I noticed it.
Did anyone else actually notice the music, or what the music was, or what kind of music it was? Anybody?
No.
I guarantee that's one of the most overlooked things in films. So sad for all those people who produce music directors that are in films, because it's not noticed. But again, you don't want it to be obtrusive. You don't want it to say like, oh, when that music came on, that kind of like ruined everything. So what was, nobody has a strong scene that they would pull out as really, that was a good scene? Or I don't know why they included this. We could have cut that out. The film ran about 93 minutes, which is just about right for most documentaries. That's what they shoot for, about 90 minutes. Marion.
Yeah, I thought just looking, I looked at this to answer the question. I mean, I thought there would maybe be too many interviews with, I don't know whether they were her publishers or her agent or her representative. I don't know how much, whether we needed all of those. I will say that the interview with David Hare was for another, because I couldn't figure out who that was. I just never pictured David Hare as this essentially like a classic British gentleman. I said, oh my God, that's David Hare. I just never pictured him that way.
I mean, personally, I always find it annoying. First time somebody appears in a documentary, there's a little crawl that says David Hare, editor, or something like that. But then it doesn't come back. And sometimes I forget who they are. Like later in the film, and I go, now he's the, who was he? He was somebody. I know they mentioned who he was before. I need that crawl at the bottom all the time, I think. But that's a documentary style. First time you do it, sort of like citations in the paper. First time you cite it, the next time it's just, opposite or whatever. Anything else on scenes? Is Claire raising her hand or just waving at us? All right, unmute Claire. You have to unmute Claire. We don't hear you. Got to click the little thing.
I wasn't engaged in the beginning, the first 1/3, but the last 1/3, I really wanted to turn it off and watch the next day because I was getting very tired, but I was too involved in it. So I would definitely leave the latter part of it and I can't give you exact times or scenes, but when she was talking about her daughter's illness and her husband's death and that is what her 2 memoirs are about. I found it more powerful and it was more linear too, I believe. So that might have helped. I couldn't turn it off when I wanted to. Now I'm tired because I didn't get enough sleep. Thank you very much. No, seriously. But I want to just go back to something people seem to be saying, she wasn't reacting right about her daughter. Maybe it was about adoption. Maybe she, was being this or that, or maybe she wasn't being fair to her daughter being away. We can't judge one bit of that. There's just not enough in the film to say that. We don't know if her daughter said, I don't want you here. I'll take care of myself. I don't need you. Or we don't know if, her book tour had to go on at that point. And as for adoption, it has zero to do with any kind of guilt, and how she reacted about her husband's death. That seems one of the stages of grief, or that she was going through, which was denial. That's why she wanted to keep his clothing. I know a number of people who have kept clothing for a lot, for longer than that. So I think we can't be judgmental of her based on this. Maybe her memoirs, I haven't read them, and that's my last part. If I were going to read one of them, which one would you suggest as more powerful or more?
I think Year of Magical Thinking is generally considered her best, but I think that read with Blue Nights together, it's kind of one giant book, really, except a big shift between the books. Like I said, there's no magical thinking in Blue Nights. There's kind of more of an acceptance and a turning inward on what was my role in all of this as a wife, as a daughter, as a mother, treating her, as a daughter, that sort of thing. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. Actually, we've hit the end of our time, but there is one more question, and it's my English teacher question. So if you wanted to play English student, I just thought it was interesting because they never explained it in the film, the title of the film, The Center Will Not Hold. So I thought I'd go back to it, and the title of the film and one of her books comes from the same poem by Yeats called The Second Coming. And so I put a little passage there and a link if you wanted to read the whole poem. But that's a poem actually it's about revolution is really what it's about. He wrote it in 1919. It was a post-World War I film. He wrote it during the flu epidemic. His wife was pregnant and almost died from the flu. It was post-World War I, but it was the start of the Irish War of Independence after the Easter Uprising. So it really was a film about film. It was really a poem about revolution. Now, I don't know, is that a good title for the documentary? I'm not sure. When she used it for her book, which is called Slouching Towards Bethlehem, which is another line, sort of a line in the poem, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. She was writing about the revolution of the time. And we know that she covered, in another country, she covered revolution. She also talked about the whole hippie movement and the revolution of the 60s and everything. So it really fit the book. But they took another line for the documentary, which is the center will not hold, that, things fall apart, basically. In fact, a lot of other people have used this poem. There's a book by an African author, Achebe, that's called Things Fall Apart. And it's that whole idea that, everything kind of atrophies after a time. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Things cannot hold together. Now, is that what the film is about? A life that sort of fell apart and couldn't hold its center? Maybe that's the comment that Griffin Dunn is making. I'm not sure, but it's certainly not a film about revolution. It fit the book better, kind of thing. So at least he didn't use Slouching Towards Bethlehem as the title. But anybody on the poem? Anybody have thoughts on the poem? Any English majors who want to say something about it? It's a very, very famous poem. It's been quoted by lots and lots of people. No English majors out there? Come on, there's got to be one English major out there. No English majors.
English major, but I didn't like the title. And I recognize the things fall apart. I just don't think it would attract people's attention because was there ever a center to her? I'm not sure. It didn't come out in the film anyway.
It's like I was saying with some of the other things, you wouldn't know what the title means. I mean, because if you're going to use it as a title, maybe there should be a reference to it, a little epigraph that says where the line is, or maybe ask Joan the question about, why did you call your book Slouching Towards Bethlehem, or what was it about Yeats that you really loved, or something like that. You're right. I mean, if you say like Joan Didion, the center will not hold, what is this about? So other than thinking that it's about a life that center couldn't hold and sort of fell apart, that's about the best I could come up with for, why you would use that line. I like Yeats, but, not so much. Okay, any final thoughts before we click out here?
What's next week?
Next week. You will get your sheet for next week's film. I will say just lightly that the film, which is on Netflix again, is it's kind of hard to say. It's about Anne Frank, but it's not about Anne Frank. And as I said on the first film, the three films I think have some connections, which hopefully when we get to the third film, you'll see some connections between them. Like at this point, you could say, this was a documentary made by somebody who obviously had a sort of prejudice in making the film. And the first documentary was made by, Michelle Obama's and the Obama's company. So there was kind of maybe a little prejudice in there. A person who was a writer, a person who was not a writer who wrote a book. But if you know a lot about the Anne Frank story and everything, it's not going to be a repeat because it's different than that. It's kind of not what you would expect. It's not like the life story of Anne Frank exactly, but it certainly is related to it. And I thought it kind of tied the three films together in an interesting way. So
Can you send me that? Because I'm not on your list. I'm not sure. Is this an email?
Everybody who's on the class list automatically gets
I'm not
email
sure. It was all screwed up.
I'll catch up with Michelle and make sure that we get that to you. Okay, Roz?
So I don't have Netflix. Is there any other way to capture this?
I'll try to connect with you on that too. Michelle has your email, correct?
She does. Thank you.
Okay. I'll catch up with you and we'll figure that out.
Okay, good.
In the old days, BC, before COVID, we used to do this at Cinema 505 on Bloomfield Avenue. We would sit and watch the film together, and 90 minutes afterwards, we would talk for a half hour, 45 minutes, which is the ideal.
Yeah.
This is a little more convenient for being at home, but again, if you can't see the film and if it's not fresh in your mind, it's a little harder to have the discussion. But there's that communal feeling that when we were sitting in the theater. And someday we will do it again, but it might be a while. So we are considering another round of these films for possibly January. There won't be something in December, but for January. So we'll look at another group of 3 films probably in 2021.
See if you can concentrate on HBO or PBS, because Netflix is just not for everybody.
Right. Well, I think they chose Netflix. I didn't choose it, but I think they chose Netflix because it is the dominant one at this point.
Of course,
it has
right.
more subscribers than anything else. But
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, maybe sometime we could do a series where the film is actually available legitimately on like YouTube or something, but that really limits you to the certain titles. Of course, we could do classic films. Some of the classic films are available for free. So, but we've done documentaries for this series, even at Cinema 505, because they're less likely to be films that people will watch on their own sometimes, although some of you probably love documentaries, but people watch the feature films, but sometimes the documentaries kind of get lost along the way. Did somebody have a hand?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, I mean, I don't have HBO, I have Netflix, but through the library, we can all get see all of the movies that are on through Canyon. Is it Canyon? Somebody correct me.
Well, I don't know the name of the service, but yeah, we had mentioned, I think somebody had mentioned that last week too. So that's,
I
think it's
January.
Canopy.
Canopy.
I knew that was.
And it's available as long as you have a library card.
Okay, so it's sort of like Hoopla and some of those other things that it's kind of free and open to the library. So maybe that's a consideration. I mean, I don't live in Montclair, so I probably couldn't do the library services unless my library does it. But yeah, we'll consider the topic of access, right, Jill?
Yeah, we'll look into that for the next round. Next week's though is available on Netflix. And Roz, I'll connect with you and we'll figure out how to get you access to that. And if anyone else is having any other problems.
Yeah, YouTube is great.
Canopy is spelled with a K, right? That's right. The one, Canopy? Okay. I think I downloaded an app, but I don't think I've used it. So, okay.
And if you guys have any questions at all, you can always email me at jill@montclairfilm.org. And if you have any difficulties, we'll try to figure out how to get that figured out.
And maybe we'll put it in the next newsletter, but I mentioned last time that I was surprised and maybe not totally thrilled that these programs are put onto YouTube and you can watch them afterwards, which made me think about, be careful what you say, Ken. But if you didn't get to see last week's film or our conversation, you can go to YouTube and watch the conversation. And after the fact, you can't comment obviously, but you can watch it after the fact.
What do you call it?
Our earlier series was on there too about filmmakers. So
what do you call it? How do you pull it up on YouTube? What's the title?
Thank you.
I think it's under the Mill, the Lifelong Learning Montclair.
Yeah.
Say that again.
It's under
Learning Montclair, but Jill will put it into the next email.
Okay.
A link, right?
Sure.
There's a playlist of them. So, okay.
Right.
Thank you. Get outside and get some air, or at least sit out on the porch.
Enjoy. We'll see you next week.